Hi, folks.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, we figured we'd end with a nice, light-hearted topic, you know?
Happy to help.
Yeah, oh yeah, of course, of course. Let me just level set here. Does AI need to be regulated, Don?
What does Martin think?
Oh.
I think our answer is very similar, but I'll probably present it a little bit different than you did, which is AI is a software system. Software system is regulated by rules that have been developed for the last 30 years. They're very robust. They've been part of an ongoing discourse. And so in as much as software is regulated, AI already is regulated. And then there's a question of, does it need new regulation? And the answer to that is we'd have to understand what is new about it, which is still a research question. And so until we understand that, I would say if you regulated it, you may be regulating the wrong thing if you did it too early, and that could be, even more negative than if you didn't regulate it. So my view is we have existing robust regulatory regime. It is sufficient for now, and if we understand, that AI is different in some way, we should evolve that, but not until we understand that.
Don, does that sound like responsible AI?
Okay, so I can add to.
A lot of that was cribbed, by the way, from Don. A lot of that was cribbed from a paper that Don wrote, by the way. So I think.
So first, let me summarize what is the current lay of land.
Please do.
So if you ask this question to the policymakers, they essentially already speak with their act. So I call this year we have a sudden proliferation of AI bills. So if you look at the federal level, there are about 120 AI bills in flight. And if you look at the state level, there are at least 45 states that have AI bills in flight, around 600 of them. So it's crazy. So I would say that if you ask this question, there's a madness about AI regulation. And going back to what Martin said, I think there's really a lot of nuance that we need to look at when we do AI regulation. If we don't do it well, then, for example, if we do it in an ad hoc way, which is mostly what current AI regulation is, we have lots of problems. We can have a lot of potential unforeseen negative consequences, and also even worse, we can actually have lost opportunity to prevent actually disastrous outcomes, and also we can have fragmentation in community, which is what we have seen, unfortunately, through the recent process of some of the bills that I won't name.
Right.
So that's why actually recently we launched a new proposal with a number of leading AI researchers called On a Path for Science and Evidence-Based AI Policy, which is exactly to address this question: should we regulate AI or not? How do we even answer this question? So here, then the answer is very simple. It should be science and evidence-based. We don't just draw out of the hat whether today we think we should regulate AI, tomorrow we think, no, we shouldn't. We should have science and evidence to speak for us. And so that's what the key of the proposal is about, is that AI policy should be informed by science and evidence, and we should do science and evidence-based approach for AI policy.
Yep.
And also, I strongly believe that this is the best approach forward for us to develop the best AI policy, and also it's the best approach forward to unite the community, to reduce fragmentation, and lead us to a safer AI world.
Now, we are sitting right now in the state of California. We three are residents of the state of California. So let me start at the state level, and then we can talk about the federal level, if you don't mind. We obviously had SB 1047 come and go as candidly a flashpoint for the industry.
Yeah.
Was that science and evidence based? And by the way, that's hardly the only bill that went through California.
So that's a very good question. So
Yeah.
that's actually the reason, not the reason, but that's one of the motivation is from what we have seen in the process. Again, like I said, so currently, most of this AI regulation efforts is quite ad hoc. Mm-hmm. You can talk about, the different thresholds, whoever has liability. A lot of these things, we need better, more rigorous approach that gives us the science and evidence, and also to really analyze. So for example, in the proposal that I mentioned, we actually proposed 5 priorities for AI policy. And we propose how you should actually analyze AI risks. It should be a marginal risk.
I wrote them down, Don. It's understand risks, increase transparency, develop early warning mechanisms, develop technical mitigation and defense mechanisms, and trust to reduce fragmentation. Those are the 5 of the proposal, right?
Great. Fantastic. You did your homework.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
very impressed. Thank you.
So I think actually SB 1047 is a great example for us to talk about because, there were so many policies, so why is this the one that got people up in arms, right? And so I'll tell you why, which is, again, we have 30 years of discourse on regulation and policy in tech, right? And so we kind of understand basic principles, we kind of understand the basic paradigms by which we apply them. And SB 1047 was a paradigmatic shift in the following way, which it actually included something called developer liability. And what developer liability means, which is like if I'm building a piece of software and somebody else uses it and that causes some catastrophic event, then I am liable. Now, in like 40 years or 30 years of tech policy, we've never done this. And maybe it's something worth doing with AI, maybe, but it's a paradigmatic shift that is divergent from 30 to 40 years of policy. And so we're like, whoa, wait, time out. Like, listen, if you want to do policy, fine. We kind of understand policy. This is a discourse that's been going on for a long time. You've got a lot of experts, but you're not listening to any of that. You're doing something entirely new and based on, as Don, who's a world expert on this, would say, no evidence. And so I would say, listen, it's a very important problem, AI policy. It's a very important problem. And listen, we can even do spurious policies if we want to, because that's what policymakers do, and they're going to do spurious policies. We're going to definitely see that happen, but please let's not create a new paradigm in policy that we don't understand the adverse effects of without actually understanding the risks. And the reason is we're going to set a precedence, and we may end up policing entirely the wrong thing. And so, again, there's a lot of new laws and policy being proposed all of the time, but certain ones of them are particularly pernicious, and this was one of them for exactly this reason.
And so, Governor Newsom vetoed it, so it's a moot point. But where do we go from here, Martine? I mean, do we think that we're actually going to take the big step back and do what you're saying?
So I think there are very legitimate efforts that are tangible and near term and winding their way through the courts, right? Things like copyright, I think is incredibly legitimate and we should understand it. Things like child protections are incredibly legitimate and we should understand it. And so everybody agrees on this and there's consensus and we should focus on those. So let's focus on the tangible ones that we know are real. A lot of SB 1047, the proponents are X-risk people. They're oh, AI is going to take over the world, so we need to put in these precautions that don't make any sense, right? And so I would say, listen, let's put aside the science fiction. Let's put aside this kind of existential risk stuff. Let's focus on stuff that we know is kind of near-term and real and impacts people's day-to-day lives. And by and large, I think that's actually what is happening. I think we've kind of regained some sense. It's been 5 years in this journey, and we, as far as we can tell, this AI stuff's actually pretty safe, and we're actually focusing on tangible, practical, near-term regulation. Sure.
Okay, so again, coming back, actually, we, again, in the proposal, we made these 5 priorities. And the number 1 actually is to understand AI risks.
Yeah.
And actually in there, we actually propose that we do need to understand AI risks in a very comprehensive way. So there are other risks that Martin mentioned, but there are also longer term risks. So I think people need to, I think it's helpful for the society to do comprehensive study to analyze, to understand the AI risks. But right now, I think, as I mentioned, we want to be science and evidence-based. So the first step is that we need to better understand the science, and we need to collect the evidence. And so I think it is important that we study a wide-ranging different types of risks, but we need to understand them, and then the policy need to be appropriate to the level of understanding that we have.
Yeah, can I jump?
Sure.
So I think it's actually, so a lot of people that have been following this don't know how remarkable it is that Don's up here. And so one thing about these policy wars in the past, 20 years ago, is the forefront was academia and hobbyists, and we had these robust debates. Now what's been very remarkable about the AI one is when SB 1047 came, academia was largely silent or hadn't weighed in or so forth. And so I think another thing that's been fantastic about this first wave of policy, it has started the conversation and has brought in stakeholders that really, I would say, are far more neutral than, say, myself. I'm a venture capitalist, right? So clearly I've got a bias, right? So I should be a voice, but I should not drive the conversation. Though in that case, I actually was driving the conversation, right? So I think we're now at a great place where we've got people like Don who are real expert who are hey, listen, this is a very important problem. And I think academia is engaged, and I think that's actually where we should start moving these discussions too. And so the very concrete next step, let's all fund Dawn to figure this out for us.
No, thank you. So,
Pro Dawn, I get it.
I'm pro
hold on
Dawn.
a second. So let's. I do want to come to the audience for questions in a minute, but I want to make the jump up to the federal level.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have a change in the White House very imminently. The outgoing president outlined an AI framework. The incoming one is certainly planning to do just that. How are we going to stick to our science and evidence-based guns in this environment, Dawn?
that's a very good question. I think, especially in the changing environment, I think it's even more important that we focus on the science and evidence-based approach. And in fact, so we are discussing at all levels, including the federal level and even including the National Academy and so on. So far, actually, this proposal has received huge positive feedback. It's only launched maybe about 2 months. We already have volunteer contributors from about 200 different institutions actually volunteer to help with this effort. And also, we have received a lot of positive, huge support from civil societies, from a lot of different entities and so on. So we really hope that we can bring this as a whole community society effort. I think it's hugely important.
It sounds like a plan. All right, let's go to the audience for questions. Yes?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Nobody knows what's going to happen under Trump when it comes to AI policy. It's nobody knows, right? I don't know, And so on one hand, I'm cautiously optimistic because what happened under Biden was terrible. It was you had this executive order that made no sense, and then it was all this kind of crazy AI policy stuff. On the other side, let's be honest, SB 1047, which I think is probably the worst. Probably the worst bill, I would say, in the United States personally, because of the paradigmatic shift, was supported by Elon, right? And so anybody that thinks that they know what's going to happen, I don't think that they really understand the players. It could go either way. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think it's good to have a change. I think where we're coming from was actually very bad when it came to AI policy, but no idea, what it'll actually look like.
All right.
That's my prognostication.
Yeah. We should ask an AI agent about it. All right, let's go to the audience for questions, comments about regulation and policy. Oh, we've stunned them. Look at that. Yes, right over here, sir. Your name and who you're with.
John Durkin, Chief Technologist with IDA Ireland. So I'd be very interested from the panel's point of view, particularly looking at the EU AI Act that came out recently and the perspective that has, and we saw with GDPR, how that kind of set regulation around the world. But in the context of the EU AI Act, what's your kind of feelings on that? Has it been too much focused on regulation? Or is it because it took a risk-based approach and it's kind of looking at the idea of setting kind of this idea of being more based on research to make the informed decisions as it goes through? So just interested in your view.
I know my answer, but I'll let you go.
I think, right. I mean, EU in general, they do take a lead a lot of these regulatory efforts. And now, actually, still, they have this code of practice efforts is ongoing. So I think a lot of details are actually still in the progress to figure out exactly what the company needs to do to comply, what other recommendations are, and so on. And I think they are taking a first step. And I think it's leading certainly it's helping making progress in the space. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot that we actually really do need to study to figure out.
Don's very diplomatic. So listen, I come from a very, very poor part of Spain, actually. I'm a dual citizen. It's called Murcia, which is the Appalachia of Spain. I love it. It's a great place. We have Alcaraz as a tennis player. He's great. We also have a phenomenal founder who started actually a great company in Gen AI. And the company's called Magnific. His name is Javier, and he's done all of this great work. And today, as we speak, he's back in Murcia. This it's a great part of Spain, but not known for its tech founders and entrepreneurs. And by the way, Magnific is in the Gen AI pixel space. So it's images and videos and stuff like that. And he cannot access Sora. So Sora is the video model that was just released by OpenAI yesterday, right? And so you tell me, but from my standpoint, when you have a great founder who can't even engage in his own area, because he can't access to something that like a company like OpenAI released, I think that they're strictly bad. So I think that the EU is totally bungling it. I think it's putting itself backwards, and I think it's got to change its tune or it's going to get in trouble.
But how do you really feel?
That's how I feel.
Yeah. More questions, please. Yes, we have one way in the back. Your name and who you're with.
Hi, I'm Alana Cohn with HackerOne, and admission, I'm a former federal regulator. So I understand the instinct to say we don't need anything, we're already regulated, we've got this on lock. But the federal regulation process, specifically the rulemaking process, it does take science and evidence into consideration because, of course, there has to be notice and comment, and you have to be able to provide that information, which they take into consideration when they do those rules. In the absence, while we're off here saying we don't need anything, the EU, Singapore, everyone else is essentially regulating for us. So like privacy, we don't have anything here in the US, we've been fighting it for years, and so the EU essentially runs our regulation. So is that the right approach from your perspective? And does it make sense to continue to say we don't need anything and we'll let all these other countries do it for us?
Great question. Thank you, Alana.
So first, I don't think we are saying that we don't need anything, right? I mean, the proposal for a science and evidence-based approach for AI policy does not mean that we don't need anything. Actually, in fact, in that proposal, we actually talk about certain priorities for regulation, including, for example, transparency, adverse event reporting, so we can do like a harm monitoring for post-deployment harm and do this adverse event reporting and so on. So nowhere we say that no, that means no regulation. I think it's more just providing a more grounded approach that is grounded in science and evidence. And also, again, like I said, and also actually in the end, we actually have additional call to action proposal. It's actually to have the community come together to discuss and propose what we call candidates AI policies for we call the conditional response, so that the community can discuss under what conditions, what policy would be appropriate. It's just in this way that we can have multi-stakeholder open dialogue discussion in a low-stake environment. So we hope that this approach actually can lead to better consensus building process for better policy.
Understood. Martin?
Can I take a quick crack?
Yes,
I really appreciate this question because I do think it gets to the heart of it. So I think that our posture as a nation shouldn't change, and it's changing. And I want to give you an analog, which is like the internet. So I was in the national lab during basically the advent of the web and the internet, right? And we had this new stuff, and very quickly, it was clear this was marginally different, right? We had computer worms, which we didn't have before. We had this notion of asymmetry, which means we were more vulnerable than countries that didn't use it. So clearly it was marginally different, which we don't have for AI. So what did we do as a nation? We invested heavily in understanding it and building out capability. We became the leaders of the internet. We turned it into a discipline, and yes, of course, there's an entire cybersecurity. I've known Don for 20 years, who's one of the preeminent researchers in cybersecurity. So it's not saying that we ignore it and ignore policy. It says we become the leaders, we understand it the best, and we make the most practical solutions. That's not what's happening with AI. I mean, the EU is doing whatever it's doing, right? It's oh, there's this new thing, we're going to regulate it. And for us, for me, which has been so shocking, is academia wasn't even involved in the discussions. They've been silent. And so I'm saying, yes, we need to regulate, yes, we need to understand, but we need to change our posture to engage, research, invest, understand the marginal differences, and then, yes, let's do like we've done in the past, which I think is the right thing for the country.
To wrap this up, and thank you for that, to wrap this up, how are we feeling about where we go from here? Used in one or two words. Yours is cautiously optimistic. Yeah?
Yes.
Dawn?
Yes, so we need to focus on science and evidence, and we need to advance our scientific understanding. Yes.
Got it. All right. A round of applause, please. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Which direction are we going to say? Okay.
All right. And with that, we bring Fortune Brainstorm AI and indeed our entire slate of brainstorms for 2024 to a close. A gigantic thank you to our participants, that is all of you, here and in our breakout sessions for sharing your ideas and interrogating others. You are what makes every Fortune Brainstorm an actual brainstorm, and we're so glad you're here. I also want to extend a tremendous thank you to our partners, for their support. Our founding partner, Accenture. Our premier partner, Salesforce. And our partners, AARP, Adtalem Global Education, Iberdrola, IDA Ireland, Okta, and Workday. A round of applause for them, please. We couldn't do it without them. Of course, I can't finish without thanking our Brainstorm AI co-chairs, Jason Del Rey, Ali Garfinkel, Jeremy Kahn, Vern Kopitoff, and of course, Rana El Kalioubi. Yes. And I also want to thank the program and production staff who you can't see who make this all possible. Yes, a round of applause for them too. Two more things. First, I am delighted to share that Fortune Brainstorm AI will be back in London and Singapore and San Francisco next year. I hear this AI thing is really big. Please keep an eye out for dates. And second, if you are joining us for our Impact Lab with students and young professionals from Code 2040, see you in 15 minutes in the conservatory. Thank you for being with us. Safe travels. Happy holidays.